Okay, so let's unpack this. China. When you hear that name, what immediately springs to mind? Is it, a global manufacturing powerhouse, a nation leading in tech innovation, or perhaps, as our insightful source, Mookie Tenenbaum, provocatively asks, is it more like a global hideout? That's really the core question we're plunging into today. We're going to embark on a fascinating deep dive, really exploring Tenenbaum's perspective from his El Observador international discussions. Our mission here is to cut through the often carefully crafted narratives and uncover some surprising, sometimes frankly unsettling realities. And the goal is to help you, our listener, form a more nuanced and more well-informed opinion on a nation that presents such a deeply complex global image.
Yeah, what's truly fascinating here, and Tenenbaum really emphasizes this, is the significant gap, the divergence between the global image China works so hard to project and sometimes the stark reality on the ground. And this deep dive, it isn't about passing judgment, not at all. It's more like an intellectual expedition, trying to understand the multifaceted realities Tenenbaum presents. And critically, to grasp why these particular issues, the ones he raises, resonate so profoundly on a global scale. Tenenbaum, he draws on extensive research, personal experience too, and he touches upon several critical and often interconnected areas. Things like the highly organized global pipeline for stolen goods, especially electronics. Then there's the illicit trade of precursor chemicals, the stuff fueling deadly drug crises worldwide, and of course the pervasive, economically damaging world of counterfeiting. By the end of this, you'll definitely have a much clearer, more detailed picture of the intricate complexities at play. And importantly, what these dynamics truly mean for all of us, not just as consumers, but as interconnected global citizens.
Okay, here's where Tenenbaum and Insights get really, really compelling. Imagine, just for a moment, your smartphone is stolen. Not just anywhere, but say right off the street in a busy European capital like London, maybe, or perhaps even in a vibrant South American city like Buenos Aires. Now, where do you think that device ultimately ends up? According to Tenenbaum, the answer might not just surprise you. It actually reveals a hidden global pipeline for illicit goods, one that's far more sophisticated, far more organized than most of us could probably ever conceive. This isn't just random petty crime. Tenenbaum says it's a system.
Exactly. Tenenbaum meticulously details a very specific and frankly quite chilling process that underpins these seemingly random street thefts. These aren't simply acts of, grabbing something and running. They are often executed with a clear strategic purpose. The phones, he explains, are frequently snatched directly from people's hands while they're actively talking on them.
While they're talking, why specifically then?
Well, it isn't just about quick access. It's a critical detail because it deliberately prevents the owner from having that immediate window of opportunity, that moment to lock the phone, remotely wipe it, or disable the device.
Ah, okay, so you can't react fast enough.
Precisely. That brief, critical window of vulnerability is exactly what these criminal networks are engineered to exploit. It's calculated.
And once that phone is snatched, Tenenbaum explains, it immediately enters a sort of digital no man's land for its original owner, gone. And the very next step, and he says this is absolutely crucial for the criminals, is to place the device inside what's known as a Faraday cage. Now, for those who might not be familiar, what exactly is a Faraday cage?
Right. Well, basically, it's a metal enclosure. Think of it like a specially designed shield. It completely blocks all electromagnetic fields and radio waves. So no signals in, no signals out.
Like a signal-proof black box.
Exactly. It effectively renders the device completely isolated.
Okay, and the purpose of doing that, why is that step so vital?
From a criminal perspective, it's incredibly sophisticated
Mm-hmm.
and absolutely essential to their operation. By completely isolating the phone electromagnetically, it prevents any remote shutdown signals, any GPS tracking pings, or any data wiping commands from reaching the device.
So that quick action, you or I might immediately try grabbing another phone to remotely erase or lock our stolen device. It just won't work.
It becomes utterly impossible. Once inside that Faraday cage, the phone is effectively, as Tenenbaum puts it, a clean slate. Its software state is preserved, it's ready for reprocessing by the criminal network, safe from any interference from the legitimate owner or the network provider. This level of technical sophistication, Tenenbaum argues, really underscores the deeply organized nature of this illicit trade. It's not amateur stuff.
A clean slate indeed. And Tenenbaum paints this vivid picture of a truly massive, highly organized operation that goes way beyond just individual thieves on the street. These stolen phones, they aren't merely handled one by one. No, they're systematically gathered from various locations, often from different countries even, then consolidated into larger batches. Once they have a sufficient quantity, they're packed into large shipping containers. Containers that look just like any legitimate commercial shipment at first glance.
Indistinguishable. Yeah.
And then dispatched directly across continents, primarily, Tenenbaum says, to China. It's a truly global supply chain, but one dedicated entirely to trafficking stolen goods, operating with just chilling efficiency.
And the ultimate destination, the end of the line for most of these phones, Tenenbaum tells us, is overwhelmingly Shenzhen. He describes Shenzhen not just as a city, but as a colossal, sprawling market, effectively functioning as a gigantic disassembly plant, or as he evocatively calls it in Spanish, a desarmadero.
A desarmadero, like a junkyard.
Exactly. Imagine an auto junkyard, but on an industrial scale, and entirely dedicated to electronics, specifically phones in this case. Shenzhen, it's located in South China, right there bordering Hong Kong, and it becomes the nexus, the hub. Here, these stolen phones are meticulously dismantled, piece by piece, like totally broken down. Their components are then stored in screens here, chips there, batteries over there. Then they're recycled, maybe refurbished, or simply resold as individual parts into the global electronics market. Tenenbaum refers to this as a remarkable, although deeply unsettling, cycle of life for a cell phone.
Cycle of life. That's a strange way to put it.
Well, yeah, returning, in this rather unconventional and illicit manner, to its place of origin. China being a major manufacturing hub for this bizarre form of recycling, the sheer volume, the systematic nature of this process that Tenenbaum describes is just staggering.
And what's even more unexpected, maybe a bit mind-bending, is Tenenbaum's surprising philosophical analogy he draws for this whole phenomenon. He actually brings in the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle.
Aristotle, seriously.
Yeah. Aristotle famously believed that all things inherently strive to return to their natural place. Tenenbaum sort of seizes on this concept, applying it with a darkly ironic twist to these stolen phones. Manufactured in China, stolen from hands around the globe, they are then systematically funneled back to China. A philosophical take on grand larceny in global supply chains who knew. Right.
Wow. That really does frame this intricate, illicit operation in an entirely new and pretty thought-provoking light.
So, if we step back and connect this to the bigger picture, what are the critical implications Tenenbaum points out?
Well, he meticulously highlights several critical systemic failures, and honestly, a deeply troubling pattern of international complicity, or at least inaction. This isn't merely about a stolen gadget here and there. It's a window into the weaknesses of global enforcement and the disturbing incentives that seem to be at play. He highlights, for instance, the shockingly low crime resolution rate for these kinds of thefts, specifically citing the UK.
How low are we talking?
A mere 2%.
Just 2%.
2%, that's nothing. Exactly. That means a staggering 98% of these crimes go unsolved, which in practical terms pretty much amounts to a green light for criminals. It signals minimal risk for potentially high reward.
A 2% resolution rate is barely even a speed bump, let alone a deterrent. For every 100 phones snatched, only 2 cases ever get closed or lead to prosecution. That's just staggering.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? Not just about the challenges law enforcement faces, but maybe also about the resources, or the lack thereof, being put into tackling these transnational crimes. It almost makes the theft seem normal.
Precisely. And Tenenbaum explains why this problem is so entrenched, so difficult to combat effectively. Think about the colossal scale of global trade. It's just physically and logistically impossible to inspect every single container moving through the world's major ports. Doing that would grind global commerce to a complete halt. He gives the compelling example of Rotterdam and Antwerp, 2 of Europe's biggest port hubs. Even with advanced X-ray systems and significant resources focused on fighting drug smuggling, they can realistically only check a tiny fraction, maybe 1–2% of containers, inbound or outbound. Only 1 or 2%.
Yeah. Trying to do more would cause unprecedented global traffic jams, paralyzing economies. And Tenenbaum further notes, it's actually even harder, both logistically and legally, to inspect exports leaving a country than its imports, which makes this specific pipeline for stolen goods incredibly difficult to intercept at its origin point. He asserts, quite pointedly actually, that China officially functions as this disassembly plant for phones. And interestingly, he draws a parallel, mentioning that stolen high-end cars from Europe often follow a similar illicit path, ending up in Africa through these same uninspected global shipping networks.
Now, here's a particularly uncomfortable, almost paradoxical observation Tenenbaum makes that really gets to the heart of the issue. China, the very nation that stands as the world's leading manufacturer of these high-tech devices like smartphones, is simultaneously the primary, Tenenbaum says almost exclusive, recipient of illegally obtained phones for this huge recycling industry.
It's a massive contradiction, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests a deeply intertwined, almost symbiotic relationship between legitimate manufacturing on one side and illicit reprocessing on the other.
And this immediately raises an important and maybe uncomfortable question for us as consumers, as global citizens. Does this mean that components, or maybe even entire devices originating from these stolen goods, could potentially end up back in the supply chain? Could they be in new or maybe refurbished devices that you or I might end up buying?
That's a disturbing thought. What does Tenenbaum say?
His stark answer is that there's simply no guarantee this isn't happening, precisely because there's such a lack of transparency in this whole system. He highlights significant regulatory loopholes that make the problem worse. For example, he points to Argentina, which has implemented a pretty robust IMEI system that allows them to track phone parts, making it much harder for stolen devices to be re-entered into the market there.
Okay, so Argentina has a system. What about Europe?
Well, Europe, by contrast, conspicuously lacks a similar, unified, comprehensive IMEI tracking system across all its member states. Tenenbaum attributes this deficit, maybe somewhat controversially, to privacy concerns.
Privacy concerns over tracking stolen property.
Yeah, the idea that a centralized tracking system could somehow infringe on individual data rights. But these concerns, he suggests, inadvertently create a permissive environment, a sort of dark zone where these criminal networks can thrive. It makes identifying, recovering, or even just blacklisting stolen phones across borders incredibly difficult, almost impossible sometimes.
And it seems like some places are hit harder than others by this trade. Tenenbaum highlights the UK, the United Kingdom, quite alarmingly, as functioning like a star country in this unfortunate trade.
A star country, what does that mean?
It means it accounts for a staggering 40% for, or 0% of all stolen phones in Europe.
40%, just from the UK.
Yep. Yeah, an enormous proportion originating from just one nation, which suggests, particular vulnerabilities within its system, or perhaps just the sheer volume of attractive targets there.
And what's truly fascinating, or maybe deeply troubling, is the profound moral quandary and the sharp hypocrisy Tenenbaum identifies in all this. He directly contrasts China's self-proclaimed status as serious country, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, often publicly advocating for human rights and international justice. He contrasts that with its alleged deeply entrenched role in facilitating this massive illegal trade.
So he's saying they're enabling it.
Tenenbaum argues forcefully that by not just tolerating, but actively providing such an open, massive, and economically integrated market for stolen phones, China effectively instigates the violence. The violence and potential for death that are inherently associated with these street-level thefts, the muggings, the robberies.
Wow, instigates violence. That's a strong claim.
It is. He contends that China is directly profiting from the physical harm, the trauma inflicted on countless Europeans and other global citizens whose phones are stolen, often violently. And this isn't, according to Tenenbaum, some shadowy black market operating in hidden corners. Not at all. He claims the Shenzhen market, for example, operates openly, visibly, implying direct government knowledge and, by extension, complicity.
Complicity. He goes that far.
He does. He suggests you could literally go there tomorrow, implying it's that visible, that integrated into the local economy. The sheer scale and the openness of this operation fundamentally challenge China's official narrative of being a responsible global power.
Okay, so from this intricate criminal pipeline for stolen phones, with all its systemic loopholes and the chilling specter of complicity, Tenenbaum then shifts our focus to an even more devastating manifestation of these patterns, the global reach of fentanyl and its precursor chemicals. So what does this trade, according to him, mean for the escalating drug crisis we see worldwide, particularly in places like the United States?
Tenenbaum states it quite unequivocally. China stands as the primary exporter of the essential precursor chemicals needed to manufacture fentanyl. And the human toll of this trade, it's just horrifying. It's directly linked, he says, to approximately 100,000 American deaths annually.
100,000 deaths every year.
Every year.
Yeah.
This isn't just a contained drug problem anymore. It has absolutely escalated into a full-blown public health crisis, and arguably a national security issue for numerous countries grappling with the devastating consequences of addiction and overdose. The scale of the loss is just staggering.
And Tenenbaum uncovers what he describes as a deeply cynical cooperation loophole in this deadly trade. So China faced immense international pressure, right, to curb the fentanyl crisis, and they officially agreed to cooperate, and crucially, they banned fentanyl exports.
Right. On paper, that sounds good. A positive step, a sign of global responsibility. But the catch, according to Tenenbaum, is that they merely pivoted. They found a workaround. Instead of exporting the finished illegal drug, They now systematically export the precursors, the raw ingredients needed to make it directly to Mexico.
Ah, so they banned the final product, but not the building blocks.
Precisely. And once those precursor chemicals arrive in Mexico, Tenenbaum explains, the highly organized drug cartels take over. They transform these ingredients into fentanyl within their clandestine cocinas, their kitchens as he calls them.
So China just supplies the ingredients and the cartels do the cooking.
That's the setup Tenenbaum describes. And the cynical logic employed by China, as he articulates it, is effectively, look, I don't make fentanyl myself, I just sell these ingredients, which can have legitimate uses. What they choose to do with those ingredients down the line, well, that isn't really my business.
Wow, that's quite a defense.
It raises an absolutely critical question, doesn't it? How can such potent and dangerous precursors, capable of producing a substance responsible for so many deaths, be so readily available from China, especially when other nations rigorously prohibit their sale? Tenenbaum's insights here really highlight what appears to be a deliberate policy choice, an intentional facilitation of this deadly trade, allowing it to flourish under a veil of technical deniability.
So just to be clear, if you or I, say, wanted to buy these fentanyl precursors in Argentina or Brazil or the US or anywhere in Europe,
Forget about it.
it would be impossible, right?
Okay.
We'd face immediate, strict prohibitions, probably severe legal trouble because of the regulations.
Absolutely. National and international rules are tight on those specific chemicals.
But in China, Tenenbaum suggests it's a dramatically different story.
Indeed. Tenenbaum explains that China possesses this immense, highly sophisticated chemical industry. And ironically, much of it was initially developed and built using technology and investment from American and European companies.
So Western tech helped build the industry that's now exporting these precursors.
That's the picture Tenenbaum paints. This highly advanced industrial infrastructure now enables China to produce these fentanyl precursors on a truly massive industrial scale. And crucially, Tenenbaum explicitly asserts the Chinese government is fully aware of these activities. He doesn't mince words. He uses a memorable, almost jarring phrase, something like, "The Communist Party knows the color of your underwear," just to convey the depth of their awareness.
Wow. So complete knowledge, he argues.
And by extension, complicity in this precursor trade. He describes a system where ordering these precursors might seem deceptively easy. A supplier might initially feign reluctance, maybe say something like, "Oh, it's forbidden," which creates a superficial paper trail of official denial.
A little bit of plausible deniability.
Exactly. But then they proceed with the shipment anyway, allowing the trade to continue unimpeded. It effectively circumvents international controls through what Tenenbaum sees as a deliberate policy of obfuscation and, frankly, willful blindness. This isn't an oversight in his view. It's a strategically facilitated process designed to externalize the deadly consequences while internalizing the profits from the chemical sales.
Okay, so we have stolen phones creating this illicit global pipeline, and then the deadly flow of drug precursors fueling a crisis. And as if that weren't enough, Tenenbaum also shines a penetrating light on another pervasive, although maybe economically different, global issue: counterfeit goods.
Right, with the fakes.
He asserts quite definitively that a staggering 90% of all falsified goods globally originate from Hong Kong and mainland China.
90%. That's practically a monopoly on fakes.
It's almost complete dominance of an illegal yet hugely economically significant market.
And what's particularly revealing here, as Tenenbaum suggests, is how he positions this. While counterfeiting is undoubtedly a massive problem for legitimate businesses worldwide, we're talking billions, maybe even trillions, in losses annually from lost sales, damaged brands, R&D theft, Tenenbaum actually presents it as the least egregious of the three major crimes he's discussing.
Least egregious, even though it's 90% of the global market.
Yeah. If we connect this to the broader picture of global harm, his perspective highlights a fascinating and perhaps disturbing hierarchy of perceived societal impact. Tenenbaum differentiates these crimes very clearly in terms of harm. Counterfeiting, he argues, primarily harms companies. It erodes their revenue, their intellectual property, their brand reputation. Big economic damage, yes. Phone theft, on the other hand, directly harms individuals, not just financially losing the device, but often physically, through injury, trauma, or even tragically death during the robbery itself.
Right, the violence involved.
Exactly. But fentanyl, he points out with chilling gravity, causes widespread death on a societal level. It tears apart communities, families, entire generations in some places.
So it's a hierarchy of harm.
Yeah.
Companies, then individuals, then mass casualties.
That's the perspective Tenenbaum offers. And it profoundly reframes what we often consider minor versus major international crimes. It forces us to confront the extreme gravity of the phone theft violence, and especially the fentanyl crisis, even when compared to the immense economic problem of counterfeiting.
Okay, so let's step back again and consider the wider implications for international relations. This is the big question. If these problems, stolen goods, fueling violence, deadly drug precursors causing mass death, widespread counterfeiting undermining economies if they're so pervasive, and as Tenenbaum forcefully argues, so openly facilitated or at least tolerated by China, why isn't the rest of the world doing more to stop it? It feels like the elephant in the room.
It really does. And Tenenbaum, always direct, suggests a clear, albeit quite drastic, solution.
Which,
A widespread global boycott. He frames it very unequivocally. If you sell fentanyl and are a criminal, I won't buy from you, China. Simple as that, in his view.
a boycott. Okay, but how realistic is that? Can China handle that kind of pressure?
Tenenbaum emphasizes, with a fair degree of certainty, that China's entire economic model lives and breathes on exports. It's fundamentally export-driven. He posits that if China were to face a widespread, coordinated boycott from major economic powers, think the U.S. and the European Union acting together, right? Its economy, as he vividly puts it, would sink quickly.
Sink quickly. That's dramatic.
He's convinced that this reliance on global trade, on selling things to the rest of the world, represents China's true Achilles heel, its most significant point of economic vulnerability.
But hold on, there's a profound and very real economic bind for Western nations here. Yeah, it's not that simple for us either. The dilemma is clear. If we don't buy from China, that inevitably means considerably higher prices for countless goods, stuff that we as consumers and industries rely on every single day.
Absolutely.
We're talking about everything from components in our cars, scooters, electronics, to the batteries in our devices, even essential chemicals used in manufacturing. The cost would be felt everywhere.
Exactly. And Tenenbaum frames this predicament as a stark choice, a moral choice, an economic choice that Western governments are, perhaps implicitly, perhaps explicitly, making right now. He asked with that potent directness of his, what's more important? Is it the 100,000 deaths per year in the U.S. from fentanyl? Or is it the availability of cheap sneakers and motorcycles?
Oof, that's putting it bluntly.
He argues quite forcefully that governments are currently prioritizing the availability of these cheap consumer goods, essentially looking the other way rather than confronting the inevitable domestic economic disruption. Not to mention the potential voter backlash that a comprehensive boycott or serious trade friction would undoubtedly cause. They are, in his view, making a calculated decision, whether they admit it or not, weighing economic convenience against an immense human cost elsewhere.
And if we connect this to the broader picture again, Tenenbaum seems to believe the global community's sustained inaction, this looking the other way, essentially makes them complicit. Is that fair?
That's precisely his argument. He stresses that this isn't some clandestine, hidden underground operation that the world is struggling to even pinpoint. He highlights that these illicit activities, like the massive Shenzhen market for stolen phones, are deeply integrated into China's economy. They function almost as a recognized, albeit illicit, sector.
So not just tolerated, but integrated.
That's what he claims, that these seemingly illegal operations actively contribute to the Chinese economy. They pay taxes, he suggests. They function as significant employers, keeping large numbers of people busy. And, as he notes, this helps keep a large segment of the population calm and employed, which is crucial in a country with such immense labor demands and potential for social unrest.
So it serves a domestic purpose, too.
It suggests a systemic, maybe state-sanctioned approach, where these operations are not merely tolerated, but are an acknowledged, if officially denied, part of the economic fabric. He cites these astonishing figures like 40,000 phones stolen per month globally and funneled through this system, just to illustrate the immense scale and the economic significance of this operation. And remember how he differentiates the destinations.
Right. The expensive phones go to Shenzhen.
Exactly. Expensive high-end stolen phones specifically target Shenzhen for maximum profit extraction and that sophisticated reprocessing, while the cheaper, less technologically complex devices might end up in places like Peru and Bolivia, perhaps for simpler resale or parts. And he offers that memorable, chilling quote to underscore the efficiency of this pipeline. Travel to China, your phone is already there.
Okay, so if these problems are so deeply entrenched, so clearly economically integrated into China's system, as Tenenbaum describes, what would it genuinely take to change this dynamic? What's the lever?
Tenenbaum is very direct on this. He argues, with real conviction, that China, or more specifically the ruling Communist Party, only truly understands one thing:
And that is?
force. Now, he clarifies he doesn't necessarily mean military force. He's talking about unified, unwavering, substantial economic pushback from the international community.
Economic force. Does he have examples of where that has worked?
He does. He backs this assertion with compelling historical examples. Tenenbaum recounts how, maybe a decade or so ago, China was notorious for rampant copying of patented intellectual property, just blatant IP theft. They would simply take innovations, designs, technologies from other countries and reproduce them without any consequence, openly violating international IP laws.
I remember hearing about that era.
Right. And according to Tenenbaum, it took intense, sustained international pressure, combined with credible threats of boycotts and economic sanctions, to eventually lead to some improvement. Imperfect, yes, but some progress in their respect for intellectual property rights. And he even shares this fascinating personal anecdote to really drive the point home.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
Tenenbaum apparently had a software company operating in China at one point. He presented his product to Sina, which was a major internet company back then. The CEO, he vividly recalls, explicitly threatened him. Said something like, if Tenenbaum didn't sell the software to them for cents, they would just assign 5,000 people to copy it.
5,000 people to copy software. Wow. Brazen.
Absolutely. And later, another Chinese company did indeed copy their software. And the extent of the brazenness was astonishing. They even included functions that were uniquely named in Argentine Spanish, names like dulce de leche and mate.
No way. So undeniable proof of copying.
Clear as day. It demonstrated the direct appropriation.
That's a truly remarkable personal story. It really illustrates Tenenbaum's point about the specific kind of pressure, the force that actually gets their attention. So how did that situation with the copied software finally get resolved then?
Well, Tenenbaum explains that the CEO of a company that copied his software happened to be a Chinese-Canadian citizen. He leveraged this. He threatened her with immediate arrest in Canada for copyright violation if she ever set foot in the country again.
Personal legal jeopardy.
Exactly. This direct, undeniable, and personal legal pressure eventually led to a resolution. An agreement was reached. And this personal experience profoundly reinforces his broader belief. Only direct, undeniable, consistently applied pressure yields results when dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, in his view. He also cites former U.S. President Trump's actions with tariffs as another significant example of applying economic force, actions which Tenenbaum believes made China take notice and, at least to some extent, respond or adjust. His core argument remains steadfast. If a country possesses the power and the knowledge to stop these widespread criminal activities but actively chooses to do nothing about it, it essentially becomes, in his words, an accomplice to the crimes.
An accomplice. That's strong language.
It is. And he further illustrates this point by citing the recent U.S. tariffs imposed on India for its continued purchase of Russian oil, demonstrating that powerful countries can and do enforce economic pressure when they deem it strategically necessary or politically expedient.
And Tenenbaum isn't suggesting something impossible or unrealistic for China to do, is he? He emphasizes that closing down the Shenzhen market for stolen phones, completely halting the sale of fentanyl precursors, putting a real end to major counterfeiting operations. These are not central or vital pillars of China's overall economic output or its core industrial strategy.
Exactly. These aren't industries that are somehow indispensable to the nation's survival or its primary economic engine. They could shut them down without collapsing the economy.
So why don't they, in his view?
Precisely. Yet, Tenenbaum argues they persist in allowing or facilitating these activities due to a deeply ingrained sense of impunity. China's implied counter-argument, the calculation Tenenbaum believes they're making, is effectively, who's genuinely going to come for me? Who's going to enforce this?
Yeah.
Brett, you won't risk a widespread boycott because then you'll suffer economically from the higher prices and the supply chain chaos.
So they're betting the West won't pay the price.
It's a calculated gamble in his analysis. A strategic assessment of the West's perceived unwillingness or inability to absorb the significant economic costs required to truly confront these issues head-on. This underscores Tenenbaum's belief that it's the lack of unified, decisive international action that's enabling the continuation of these harmful practices.
Now, this discussion, understandably, it can get very sensitive very fast, especially when we're discussing a nation as vast and diverse as China. But Tenenbaum is exceptionally clear on a critically important distinction here.
Yes, this is crucial to his argument.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of the true nature, the motivation behind China's actions, according to him?
He stresses absolutely unequivocally that these actions, these policies he describes, the facilitation of theft, precursors, counterfeiting, are not inherent to or reflective of Chinese culture or the Chinese people themselves.
That's a vital distinction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He makes a point of highlighting that Chinese populations in other parts of the world, think Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, they do not engage in such state-level illicit activities, which demonstrates, he argues, that these are not cultural traits or ingrained ethnic behaviors.
Okay, so if it's not the culture, what is it?
Instead, Tenenbaum unequivocally attributes these policies directly and exclusively to the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. He states it quite starkly. It's a policy of the party, not even the state, because the Chinese state is the Communist Party.
Their party is the state.
That's his framing. It makes it a top-down, deliberate, ideologically driven decision by the ruling elite, not some organic societal issue. He also notes that when the CCP is pressed on these issues, maybe in diplomatic circles, they frequently invoke historical narratives. Things like the Opium Wars, often with a tone that implies, you Westerners took from us, you exploited us in the past, now it's our turn to gain an advantage, even if it bends the rules.
So, using historical grievance to justify current actions.
That's the interpretation Tenenbaum offers, suggesting a perceived historical grievance is being used, perhaps cynically, to rationalize or justify current illicit activities on the global stage.
And that evolution he described of the fentanyl trade, from selling the finished drug to then selling its precursors,
Yeah.
that really illustrates this calculated, almost adaptable approach he attributes to the CCP, doesn't it?
It really does. They started by exporting the finished illegal drug, faced international pressure. Then they strategically pivoted to selling the raw ingredients, effectively teaching others, the cartels, how to manufacture it themselves.
It's a clever workaround, not a genuine cessation of the trade.
Exactly. It maintains the flow, maintains the profit from the chemical sales, but adds a layer of deniability.
And Tenenbaum is very explicit. This isn't about traditional criminal organizations like the triads.
Right. He acknowledges that groups like the triads exist, certainly, wherever there are large Chinese populations, even in the U.S., that's organized crime. But for these specific issues, the scale of the phone disassembly, the precursor exports, the mass counterfeiting, he explicitly states this is the Chinese government, or, more precisely, the CCP operating through the state apparatus,
Okay.
which then raises that profoundly important question for the global community. If these actions are, as Tenenbaum asserts, state-sanctioned or state-facilitated, how does China manage to maintain its international standing, its powerful seat on the UN Security Council, and simultaneously condemn other nations for their actions, often related to human rights or international law?
It's a stark contrast.
Tenenbaum draws some very strong, very provocative parallels here. He's essentially encouraging us, the listeners, you, to critically re-examine our assumptions about state sovereignty, international accountability, and maybe even double standards.
And he certainly isn't mincing words when he describes China's status in the international arena based on these activities. What terms does he use?
No, he doesn't hold back. Tenenbaum categorizes China, based on these specific actions, as a forajido, a Spanish word meaning outlaw or bandit, essentially a criminal country in its international dealings in these areas. He directly likens it to states or entities that are more universally recognized for their illicit activities. He draws parallels to North Korea, known for counterfeiting U.S. dollars and drug trafficking, or Syria, implicated in the Captagon drug trade, even historical examples of states operating completely outside accepted international norms.
Those are some heavy comparisons.
They are. And he highlights what he sees as China's profound hypocrisy on the world stage, especially given its powerful position on the UN Security Council. There, China often issues condemnations against other countries, maybe Israel, maybe various European nations, on issues like human rights or violations of international law, while, according to Tenenbaum, simultaneously and actively engaging in these massive criminal enterprises itself. He expresses genuine frustration, almost disbelief, that no one within the halls of the United Nations stands up to directly challenge China, to demand that it stop being a haven for criminals or cease actions that are being behind assassinations through its facilitation of these deadly drug trades.
He feels there's a lack of direct confrontation at the highest levels.
Yes, a powerful and direct indictment of what he perceives as the global community's silence or unwillingness to confront China directly on these specific criminal fronts.
And he even goes as far as to explicitly compare China's actions to those of Iran. That seems particularly pointed.
Yes, Tenenbaum doesn't shy away from that comparison either. He explicitly contrasts China's actions with those of Iran, a nation that has faced significant international isolation, sanctions, pariah status, really, for its alleged promotion of terrorism through proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. He critically questions why China isn't treated similarly given the outcomes of its policies. He argues that its policies, particularly through the devastating fentanyl trade, causing such widespread death, and the violence inherently linked to the global phone theft racket, make it, in his provocative framing, basically a terrorist country.
Wow. That's an incredibly strong claim.
It's an exceptionally provocative comparison, yes. And it's clearly designed to force us to consider whether different standards of accountability and condemnation are being applied to nations. Standards based perhaps more on their economic power and global integration, rather than solely on the nature and consequences of their actions. Is economic importance trumping accountability? That's the uncomfortable question he raises.
Tenenbaum also touches on something genuinely insightful here. This gap between how these profoundly serious issues are perceived within China's own borders versus how the rest of the world, or at least those looking closely, sees them. So what does this significant perception gap mean for any hope of global accountability or change from within?
Well, it speaks volumes about the pervasive nature of information control within China. Tenenbaum states pretty clearly that the vast majority of the Chinese public is largely unaware of these specific realities, the scale of the phone market, the precursor issue, because all information, particularly anything that might paint the government or the party in a negative light, is meticulously controlled, filtered, and censored by the state.
The Great Firewall and beyond.
Exactly. The government naturally, vehemently denies any involvement in illegal activities. Or, when confronted with evidence, they conveniently blame rogue actors, foreign interference, or something else entirely. They might claim, for instance, that the millions of phones arriving are merely used or discarded items legitimately entering a booming recycling market, perfectly legal e-waste. Or that the precursor chemical sales are directed only towards serious companies for legitimate industrial purposes and they can't control misuse downstream.
Plausible denials.
It's a carefully constructed narrative designed primarily to shield the domestic public from inconvenient truths and secondarily to offer a fig leaf of deniability internationally.
So it's a kind of convenient lie that Tenenbaum vividly describes, isn't it? Like a tacit, unspoken agreement where China's official denials, however thin they might seem to outsiders, allow others, particularly Western buyers, companies, maybe even governments, to essentially buy the lie, to continue receiving the cheap goods without having to directly confront their own potential complicity or the uncomfortable ethical ramifications.
That's a perfect encapsulation of his point. It's like a collective suspension of disbelief, often driven by economic convenience on both sides.
Everyone gets something out of looking the other way.
This immense market scale, combined with this widespread, officially sanctioned ignorance or denial, allows the entire illicit system to just perpetuate, year after year. Tenenbaum describes the Shenzhen market again so immense it would take weeks to walk through its entirety, a sprawling nexus of constant activity. Everyone locally, he suggests, knows about it on some level. Yet, according to him, no one truly pays sustained attention or demands significant change, even when newspapers, on rare occasions, manage to publish articles exposing its true nature. The stories just fade away. He also highlights a profound consumer detachment, particularly in the West.
What does he mean by that?
He explains that the causal chain is completely broken in the minds of many consumers. Someone buying a cheap phone or maybe a refurbished part or just any product manufactured in China doesn't connect it back to a potentially violent street robbery in London or Buenos Aires, or to the potentially deadly implications of where those Sentinel precursors originated. The connection isn't made.
Out of sight, out of mind.
People don't ask too many questions, Tenenbaum observes, suggesting that the immediate gratification of low prices often overrides any deeper ethical considerations or uncomfortable inquiry into the true cost of that convenience.
Okay, so we've gone on quite an extensive deep dive here, following Mookie Tenenbaum's truly eye-opening and often quite challenging insights. We've explored these intricate layers of illicit trade, the geopolitical dynamics, the economic pressures, the moral questions. Let's revisit our core question from the start. Is China predominantly a global power, projecting strength and influence, or, as Tenenbaum provocatively suggests, is it also functioning significantly as a global hideout, facilitating criminal enterprises on a massive scale? Where do we ultimately land after this exploration?
Well, Tenenbaum's conclusion is quite nuanced, yet at the same time, unequivocally firm. He states, pretty much, it's a bit of both. Obviously, it's a global power, but it is a hideout, and it's critically important to know who you're really doing business with.
Know your partner.
Exactly. And he issues this clear, almost prophetic warning. Today they steal from others, and perhaps you gain from the cheap goods that result. Tomorrow, they'll steal from you. This reflects his belief that these illicit activities aren't just isolated incidents or unfortunate side effects. He sees them as part of a consistent, evolving strategic approach by the CCP. He further highlights China's ongoing attempts in other areas, like trying to steal advanced artificial intelligence data, trying to get hold of cutting-edge microchip designs and manufacturing know-how, which, he notes, haven't been as successful as they might like, often due to critical hardware access issues they can't easily overcome. But it demonstrates their continued relentless efforts to gain advantage across various domains, often through illicit or ethically dubious means.
And Tenenbaum really drives home the point that China's grand, impressive public displays, like the big military parades he references, the September 3rd parade featuring figures like Putin and Kim Jong-un, he sees those as merely an elaborate screen, a carefully constructed facade.
A performance.
Exactly, designed to project an image of power, unity, modernity, masking what he perceives as the true, perhaps more accurately, the operational nature of the Communist Party, which he characterizes very differently.
And this raises that important overarching question for all of us, for you listening. What will it truly take for the world to act decisively on these issues? And maybe more importantly, what is the ultimate long-term price of continued inaction? Tenenbaum leaves us with a really stark, quite unsettling assessment of the core issue.
How does he put it?
He views the Communist Party of China not as a conventional government in the Western democratic sense, but rather, in his words, as an association for delinquency in China.
An association for delinquency. That's
I'll go there.
extraordinarily blunt.
It is. And he firmly believes that until the world, the international community, truly grasps and accepts this fundamental nature of the CCP, as he sees it, there will be no genuine progress in addressing these profound issues. He reiterates his comparison to North Korea, a nation that does face a general comprehensive boycott precisely because its criminal nature, from counterfeiting currency to state-sponsored drug dealing, is almost universally accepted and understood. Nobody pretends North Korea is a normal trading partner.
But China is different because of its size.
Exactly.
Mhm.
The immense challenge with China is its unparalleled economic integration with the rest of the global economy. Untangling that is far more difficult and costly. Tenenbaum also points to a distinct lack of widespread public pressure in the West, specifically on these issues. Why? Largely, he argues, because people directly benefit from the availability of cheap Chinese products. This creates a kind of indirect complicity, or at least a disincentive, to push too hard for change that might raise prices.
So it really does paint a picture of an incredibly complex, deeply challenging situation. There are no easy or obvious answers here for the global community, are there?
That's absolutely right. It's a geopolitical and economic knot. However, Tenenbaum does offer what he terms the only good news in this otherwise fairly bleak assessment.
Okay, some good news. What is it?
He suggests that China's current and perhaps persistent lack of independent access to truly advanced artificial intelligence technology, particularly in the most cutting-edge chip design and manufacturing processes, where the U.S. and its allies still hold key choke points. This technological gap might eventually weaken China's strategic position relative to the West. This, he postulates, could potentially, down the road, force them to change cards, as he puts it, to alter their strategy and perhaps cooperate more genuinely with the international community on various fronts, including these illicit trades.
So technology access could be a future lever.
It's a possibility he raises, though he immediately adds a very cautious writer, noting that the CCP has made many promises regarding reforms in international norms before, and has consistently failed to keep them when it suited their interests. So trust is low. Ultimately, Tenenbaum's profound and really challenging discussion compels you, to fundamentally reconsider the very definition of global power. Does it solely encompass economic might, military strength, technological prowess? Or does genuine global leadership also intrinsically demand unwavering adherence to global norms, ethical conduct, basic international law, and respect for human life beyond one's borders? And perhaps the most provocative final thought he leaves us with is, what are we as global citizens, as consumers benefiting from this system, truly willing to sacrifice? What price are we willing to pay in terms of convenience, cost, or even moral compromise for the continued availability of low-priced goods from a nation allegedly operating under these conditions? That's the question lingering in the air.
Wow, what an absolutely profound and at times disturbing deep dive. Mookie Tenenbaum, with his unique insights and that really uncompromising analysis, has certainly given us, and hopefully you, a tremendous amount to consider. Whether it's tracing the hidden illicit journey of a smartphone across continents, understanding the deadly global reach of fentanyl precursors, or grasping the sheer scale of the counterfeiting trade, It's abundantly clear that the world's multifaceted relationship with China is far more complex and often far more troubling than it typically appears on the surface. His analysis really does peel back some uncomfortable layers.
Absolutely. Tenenbaum's incisive analysis serves as such a powerful, indeed essential reminder. A reminder that critical thinking, coupled with a willingness to do a deep dive into well-researched, even challenging sources, is absolutely crucial. It's crucial for navigating our interconnected, often opaque modern world. Understanding the why and the how behind these intricate global dynamics, as Tenenbaum tries to illuminate them, allows us to see beyond the often superficial headlines. And hopefully, ultimately, make more informed decisions and judgments about the powerful forces shaping our world and our place within it. Thank you so much for joining us on this vital exploration today. We really thrive on digging into these fascinating, sometimes difficult topics, and we eagerly look forward to our next deep dive